I read her message twice. I need a break to figure myself out. No contact, just 3 lines, cold and precise, setting a completely new boundary in our relationship. No explanation, no apology, no plea. Just a statement, short and definitive. I put my phone down and observed the situation calmly, as I always do when the unexpected happens. No impulse, no emotion, just analysis. The boundary was clear. I could react immediately, but that would risk losing control. Or I could wait, observe, and collect data. I chose the latter. The break she requested wasn't a threat, it was information, and I would treat it as a variable to manage strategically. Then a notification popped up. Her mother had tagged her in a public post. Predictable, but still consequential. I opened it and read every word carefully. It wasn't a direct attack, but it framed her break for the world to see, subtly implying I was the cause. That alone was important, revealed family influence and context. I needed to consider for my next steps. I ran through scenarios. 1. She genuinely needed space to sort herself out. 2. The break was a test, a way to gauge my reaction. 3. A combination influenced by her mother. Each scenario required a different approach. None could be ignored. I didn't panic or lash out. I listed my options. Respect the no-contact boundary and observe. Attempt indirect communication through mutual friends. Prepare a controlled confrontation if she made contact. Every move had to be based on observed behavior, not emotion. Decisions driven by feelings can be exploited. Strategic decisions cannot. I studied her message closely. Neutral, almost formal. No softening. No questions. Nothing inviting negotiation. It was deliberate, calculated to provoke a measured response. I paced around my apartment not out of anxiety, but to think. If this break extended indefinitely, how would I respond? Accepting it could reduce leverage. Ignoring it could allow for more clarity and observation. Both options carried risks and advantages. I catalogued them logically. By the time night fell, nothing had changed. Her message was the same. The tagged post was still up. I hadn't reached out. That was intentional. Immediate reaction would yield little. Patience would provide insight and opportunity. I acknowledged a small trace of emotion, not indulgence, but data, disappointment, slight irritation, not weaknesses, just metrics. Observing them allowed me to stay composed while refining my next move. Her mother's post remained on my screen, likes and comments growing. Every action, every response from her, every perception from the outside world was information to analyze. I focused only on what I could control: awareness, strategy, next moves. Control begins with observation and understanding, not impulsive reaction. Eventually, I formed a framework for the next steps. Respect the boundary. Monitor behavior. Prepare for controlled interaction when she reappears. Maintain authority. Data may shift, but that doesn't mean the plan changes. I put the phone down and sat back, sensing the calm. The situation was not favorable, but it wasn't catastrophic. There was a path forward, as long as every decision was deliberate. Tonight changed the parameters, but parameters are conditions to navigate, not endpoints. I would navigate them with patience, precision, and control. The next morning, her message was still vivid in my mind. I didn't panic. I didn't feel desperate. Instead, I focused on a new variable: time. She had asked for space. and now I had a window to observe. How she used that space, whether she reached out indirectly, or whether her mother continued to intervene, all of it was critical data. I methodically opened my phone, scanning for activity. No messages from her. No signs of private contact on social media. The post her mother had tagged her in remained, gaining only a few likes and comments, nothing indicating drama escalating. Every small detail mattered. Every reaction or silence was a piece of the puzzle. I reviewed the past weeks of our relationship in my mind, assessing each interaction. Minor arguments I had previously dismissed suddenly became significant. Her request for a break was not random. It was calculated. Recognizing this behavioral pattern allowed me to predict her next moves, control timing, and shape an appropriate response. I established a quiet observation routine. Every notification, every post, every subtle sign about her was noted. If she made indirect contact through friends, comments, or subtle social media cues, I would take it into account and adjust my strategy. Staying calm was the priority. Reacting emotionally would mean losing control. By the afternoon, I noticed a subtle shift. A friend of hers posted on Instagram and tagged her indirectly. The comments seemed casual, harmless even, but context mattered. It indicated she was aware of the public visibility of this break. She wasn't hiding. She was managing how the story was perceived. This confirmed my hypothesis. The break was both self-reflection and narrative control. I didn't respond. I didn't like or comment. I simply recorded the behavior and weighed the consequences. Acting now would cost me leverage. Letting her reveal herself on her own terms was advantageous. Observation without interference was the strategy. By evening, I evaluated all possible scenarios. 1. She would return after self-reflection, possibly apologetic, expecting understanding. 2. She would continue the break indefinitely, testing my patience. 3. She would involve family or friends to apply pressure. Each scenario had a rational response. Remain calm, gather information, and plan to maintain control. I mapped a decision tree in my head. Every potential action she could take had a I didn't write it down, paper could leave traces. Mental mapping was safer, faster, and ensured I remained unshakable as night fell. The apartment was quiet, but my mind remained active. Observation didn't mean inactivity. It meant awareness, preparation, and strategic restraint. Every detail from the timing of her interactions to the nuances of her posts was data. I didn't feel powerless. On the contrary, I felt precise, measured, and informed. The break she demanded wasn't a barrier. It was an opportunity to assess, analyze, and prepare. Her actions, reactions, and signals could all be read and utilized later. Patience, in this context, was not passive. It was strategic by the end of the night. I had constructed a framework for the next 48 hours. Observe, record, anticipate, and maintain authority. Every post, comment, and interaction was a piece of the puzzle. I wasn't chasing her. I was mapping the landscape. When the right moment to engage came, I would act with clarity, control, and precision. The situation had changed, but my position remained intact. I remained in control, observing each subtle movement. The break she requested had set the stage, but the stage itself was neutral. The players moved, but I determined my response. And that distinction would dictate everything going forward. The next day, the space around me remained silent. as if the world itself were holding its breath. But the underlying tension in my mind grew sharper, spreading through every heartbeat. I no longer viewed things with mere emotion. Every action, every word, every small gesture, everything was data. And data, if read correctly, is power. The morning began with observations on social media. She didn't contact me directly, yet her posts felt like indirect news, filled with subtle signals. A photo with dim lighting, a tilted angle, eyes staring into the distance. Paired with a vague caption, everything was analyzable. I did not look with my heart, but with an analytical mind. This was a test, a measure of reaction, a way for her to control the narrative without appearing directly. I recorded every detail, every sign, like a scientist mapping phenomena. Every color, every light, every expression, even the timing of a post could be information. She might be observing whether I noticed, whether I was affected, or whether I reacted in any way. She was controlling, step by step, detail by detail. In the afternoon, her mother appeared on social media with posts that carried hints, like a subtle knife placed between me and her. But I remained unmoved. I read it as a situation report. Who was on whose side? What pressures were being applied? Which variables were emerging? And whether there were opportunities or risks for me. Every post, every comment was data for analysis. I did not reply immediately, did not act impulsively. Any hasty move would mean losing control. I repeated my mental routine, a constantly updating map in my mind, note by note, step by step. When she posted a status, I observed. When her mother added fuel to the story, I stayed silent. Every action was viewed through a strategic lens. What was the purpose? Who benefited? Who could be harmed? And what should I do next to maintain control? As night fell, the quiet space thickened with strategic thoughts. I analyzed every new behavioral pattern. The distance she requested was not just personal space, was a test, testing my reaction, my patience, and my self-control. Every indirect action from her or her family was data I could use. It could be a challenge, a lure, but certainly not random. I noticed a shift in how she presented herself online. Posts became more suggestive, images less direct, but messages stronger. A slight expression, a fleeting glance, a vaguely chosen word, everything could be decoded if I were patient enough. I did not feel hurt, nor deprived. Instead, I recorded, observed, analyzed, and compiled a profile of her, step by step, action by action. Like a strategist preparing for the final move in a chess game. Throughout the night, I imagined possible scenarios. Which reaction would make her change course? Which move of mine would maintain control? I mapped out scenarios, from the smallest details, the timing of a message, choice of words, reaction to a new post, to larger decisions regarding the relationship. This distance, instead of being a barrier, had become an opportunity, a chance to understand more, prepare my next move, and reclaim power in the narrative before anyone could predict it. Finally, when the night had deepened, I looked around the quiet space, feeling each breath, each pulse of calm. I knew this distance was far from over, and it would challenge me many times more. But I was no longer passive. I was in control, observing every move, every signal, every subtle action. When the decisive moment arrived, I would respond with clarity, precision, and unpredictability. The night ended, but my strategy had only begun. Every signal, every action from her or her family was data. And that data would determine how I moved forward, how I maintained control, and how I shaped the relationship on my own terms. I was no longer waiting. I was preparing, ready, and every breath was a part of a perfect plan. The next morning, the quiet around me was almost deceptive. Everything felt calm on the surface, but inside, every sense was on high alert. The distance she had created wasn't just space, it had turned into a complex game, where every move, every word, every tiny signal could shift the balance. Early that morning, she sent a short, seemingly casual text. No emotion, no extra words, but packed with intent. I didn't rush to respond. Instead, I analyzed it. The wording, the timing, even the punctuation could carry meaning. Was this a test, a measure of my patience? Or was she expecting me to take the initiative? I mapped it mentally, considering all variables, her possible expectations, the risk of misunderstanding, and the optimal response to stay in control. By noon, she posted a photo online. Again, that aware but empty vibe, slightly tilted angle, dim lighting, eyes staring somewhere far away. I didn't look with my heart. I looked with strategy. Every detail, the lighting, the expression, the objects in the frame, the background was data. Each element could carry a message or a challenge. I didn't respond immediately. I observed, waiting to see how others would react, to read the flow of information she was orchestrating. In the afternoon, her mother stepped in, not just posting, but interacting directly with my friends online, subtly creating social pressure. I watched every action, analyzed every comment, measured the potential impact, and mapped my steps to protect my position. I realized that even indirect interactions could carry weight. To stay in control, my responses had to be precise, calculated, never impulsive. As evening came, I began planning my next moves. Her distance was no longer a simple test. It had become a complex, strategic game, but I had shifted from being reactive to being in control. I sketched scenarios in my mind. If she kept posting hints, I would time my responses to maximize effect. If she tested through friends, I would handle each situation carefully, revealing nothing of my emotions. Every action was planned, every detail, every beat. Late at night, I reviewed the day's events, texts, posts, comments, her mother's moves, even subtle cues from mutual friends. I analyzed which signals were tests, which were genuine pressure, which offered opportunities. I logged this strategic data in my mind, like a general charting a battlefield, tracking every position, every move of the opponent. As the night deepened, the quiet around me became a launchpad for strategic thinking. I imagined the interactions that could happen tomorrow, which response would surprise her, which move would reinforce my control, and how I could create moves that no one could predict. I knew that if executed correctly, I could turn distance into opportunity, every signal into usable data, and that data into power, finally. In the dead of night, I breathed deeply, feeling each inhale, each pulse of calm. I was no longer passive, no longer driven by emotion. I was in control, watching every movement, analyzing every subtle cue, planning every step. When the decisive moment arrived, I would act with precision, sophistication, and unpredictability. The strategy wasn't over. It had only begun. Every action from her, her family, or anyone in our social orbit was data, and I would use it to guide my moves, shape the relationship, and ensure that every next step was in my hands. Every distance, every test, every challenge was an opportunity, and I was ready to turn opportunity into victory. The morning light barely touched the city, but the tension inside me had already reached full alert. The quiet around me felt deceptive. Every message, every post, every subtle gesture carried meaning. Today wasn't about waiting, it was about moving carefully, deliberately, as if each action were a chess piece on a board. Her first move was indirect. A story appeared on social media, seemingly casual, almost mundane. A coffee cup on the table, sunlight hitting her fingers, her eyes turned away from the camera. A caption, short, neutral, but intentionally vague. Every detail screamed precision, timing, angle, the absence of certain people. It wasn't random. It was a test. Would I react? Would I overstep? Or would I recognize the game and wait, collecting data? I didn't reply immediately. I observed. I dissected the post like an intelligence analyst passing a coded message. Who might notice it? Who might comment, like, or share? What ripple effect would it create in her network? Everything mattered. The smallest detail could reveal her strategy. By late morning, I made my move. A message, calm, neutral, referencing something she shared indirectly. No emotion, no over-investment, just presence and awareness. It was subtle, deliberate. The message didn't ask, demand, or plead, it acknowledged, it observed. That alone shifted the power dynamic slightly in my favor. The day unfolded as a series of micro-battles. She responded, her tone careful, teasing but not revealing. Even the emojis she chose seemed coded small signals, testing my reaction. I recorded it all mentally, noting what she revealed and, more importantly, what she left unsaid. Silence had weight. Omission had meaning. Every pause, every gap was a test. By afternoon, the social layer thickened. Mutual friends, engaged likes, tags, casual comments. Unwitting participants in this subtle psychological game. I observed the pattern. Who was loyal, who might be swayed, who could be used strategically in future moves. Every interaction became a layer of intelligence, feeding my next moves. Late afternoon brought an escalation. She posted a quote, brief, philosophical, about patience and resilience. Every nuance mattered. The source, the phrasing, the timing. Clearly, she was probing, gauging whether I would react impulsively, show frustration, or remain I did none of those. Instead, I let it linger, noting reactions from others, watching how the ripple spread across her social web. Observation had become my weapon. Evening arrived, but it didn't bring relief. I drafted responses, rehearsed potential messages, and imagined various scenarios. If she increased the intensity, if her friends intervened, if she created ambiguity on purpose. Each scenario had a calculated response. Words, punctuation, even emojis were tools, subtle levers of influence. Night fell, and I reviewed the day's battlefield. Every interaction, from her mother's cryptic comments to her carefully curated posts, was logged and analyzed. I plotted her moves against mine, predicting her next steps. This wasn't just observation anymore, it was active strategy. I had moved from reactive to proactive, shaping perception while staying unseen, guiding the narrative without revealing my hand. I imagined tomorrow what she might post, how friends might respond, the subtle tests she could orchestrate. I prepared multiple strategies, all designed to maintain control, all designed to turn distance into an advantage. Every silence she created, every indirect message, was an opportunity to strengthen my position. By late night, I leaned back and let the calm sink in. My breathing slowed, my mind sharp and focused. I was no longer just reacting. I was orchestrating. Every message, every post, every glance, every omission was a thread in a larger tapestry I was weaving. I was not just observing, I was controlling. The game had begun, and I was ready. The distance she had imposed had become the arena. Every subtle gesture, every social interaction, every indirect message was data I could use, leverage I could turn into influence. An influence, carefully executed, would give me the upper hand. As the city slept, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had made my first moves, responded strategically, and tested the boundaries. But the real challenge lay ahead. The next day, the interactions would escalate, stakes would rise, and the chessboard of subtle signals and social maneuvering would expand. I was prepared. Every step, every breath, every reaction was part of the plan. The stage was set, the pieces were in motion, and the battle for perception, control, and positioning had only just begun. The next day felt different. The quiet around me wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, charged, like the air itself was holding its breath. The distance she had created wasn't just a test anymore. It was a direct battlefield, where every word, every glance, every subtle gesture could shift the balance of power early in the morning. She appeared in the group chat with mutual friends. Her words were light, casual, almost unnoticeable, but precise enough to test me. I didn't respond immediately. I watched her typing speed, her choice of words, even the emojis she used. Every detail was data. She was probing, testing my boundaries under social pressure. An hour later, a story appeared on her account, a close-up of a subtle smile, eyes hinting at something unspoken. I knew immediately this was a test. The message was indirect, but I had to decide how to react. Respond too quickly, and I'd reveal my emotions. Wait, and I could create a surprise, control the rhythm of the game. I chose to wait, observing how others interacted with it, who liked, who commented, who might be influencing her perception. By the afternoon, her mother stepped in, amplifying the social pressure. A comment, indirect yet pointed, appeared online. I read it as a report: who was aligned with whom, how much pressure was being applied, and how precise my next move needed to be. I responded carefully, calmly, emotionally neutral, just enough to assert my position. That response sent a subtle message, not only to her mother, but to her as well. I was in control, unprovoked. Later, she messaged me privately. This time, it was direct, yet full of subtlety. I dissected every word, every pause, every punctuation mark. This was a critical moment. I had to respond just enough to maintain control, but not reveal my intentions. I answered with precision enough to hint that I was attentive, yet calm and unreadable, reminding her that I was watching without being manipulated. As the evening went on, the social landscape became more intense. Likes, comments, stories from friends, all were variables I had to account for. I mapped out scenarios in my mind. If she escalated, how would I respond? If she tried to test me through friends, what would be my approach? Every detail mattered. No action was insignificant. The climax came when she posted a long story, subtly referencing distance, patience, and who truly cares. There was no hiding now. She was challenging me directly. I didn't react impulsively. I calculated every word I would send, every emoji, every pause. My response had to show engagement, attention, but preserve calm and control. By late night, I reviewed the whole day like a strategist reviewing a battlefield. Every action, every reaction, every subtle cue from her and her mother had been analyzed and recorded. I realized the distance, the tests, the social maneuvers, they were opportunities. Opportunities to strengthen my position, to control the situation, to shape the relationship on my terms. I knew the strategy wasn't over. The game would continue, but now I was no longer reactive. I was in control. Step by step, signal by signal, interaction by interaction. When the bigger decisions arrived, I would act with precision, subtlety, and unpredictability. Every distance, every test, every social drama was now an opportunity to redefine the relationship in my favor. Finally, in the quiet of the night, I smiled. I wasn't just observing. I wasn't just reacting. I had become the orchestrator, the one in control, the one moving the pieces, the one setting the pace in this intricate, high-stakes game. The next morning arrived with a weight so heavy it felt like the entire city was holding its breath. Everything was now direct. No more indirect tests, no more safe distance to observe from afar. Every word, every glance, every message or post could shift the balance of power. This was the final stage, where all strategies, all drama, would explode early in the morning. She messaged me privately, casual on the surface, but every detail was deliberate. Typing speed, punctuation, word choice, even emoji. I read each word carefully, analyzing every pause. This was the ultimate test. React too quickly, and I'd reveal my emotions. Hesitate too long, and the opportunity would pass. I took a deep breath, stayed calm, and replied subtly enough to create pressure but still assert control by mid-morning. She posted a series of stories, sharp and indirect, fleeting sadness in her eyes, a subtle smile, captions about who really cares and who has the patience. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I observed who liked, who commented, who influenced her perception. Every gesture, every small reaction was strategic data. Each move could be leveraged for my final play. In the afternoon, her mother intervened publicly on social media. A comment, subtle but meaningful, conveyed a message without directly attacking. I read it like a strategic report, who aligned with whom, how much pressure was being applied, and how precise my next move needed to be. I responded calmly, composed, emotionally neutral, but firmly asserting my position. That response sent a message both to her mother and to her. I was unprovoked, still in control. Late afternoon, she messaged me again. This time, it was more direct, blending challenge with curiosity. I analyzed each word, each punctuation, each pause. This was the decisive moment. I had to respond just enough to maintain control while keeping my true emotions hidden. I replied with precision enough to signal awareness, yet still distant. Asserting authority already brought social drama to a boiling point. Friends' comments, likes, and tags became secondary chessboards in the game. I tracked every move, calculating each reaction. Every gesture she made even indirect was placed in a strategic map. If she escalated, if friends got involved, if she created ambiguity was ready. The climax came when she posted a long story directly referencing distance, patience, and who truly cares. No more hiding, she was challenging me directly. I didn't react impulsively. I prepared my final response, subtle but assertive, strategic yet fully in control. Every word, every punctuation mark, every emoji was deliberate. By midnight, the full picture was clear. Every step, every reaction, every signal from her and her mother had been analyzed, recorded, and used as data to guide my final move. I realized that all the distance, tests, and social drama had become opportunities to consolidate power, control the situation, and shape the relationship on my terms. In the quiet of the night, I smiled. I was no longer passive. I wasn't just observing, not just reacting. I had become the orchestrator, the one in control, the one crafting the final move. All drama, all challenges, all subtle strategies had been turned into power. And in that moment, I knew the climax had passed. Every decision, every drama, every test, everything was now in my hands. I held complete control. The game was over, but the way I walked away, the way I directed the story, that was the true victory.